The courtyard of the palace stood in silence, though the air itself seemed to tremble. The sun broke through the clouds, spreading its golden light over the tall stone walls and ancient arches. Royal guards lined the path, their black coats pressed, their golden cords glinting. Their faces were still, but their eyes carried the weight of unspoken rumors that, at the heart of this silence, walked Queen Camilla. Her gown shimmered with embroidery, a mix of cream and blue, rich with royal symbols. Her crown sat steady on her head, but her heart was far from steady. She felt the pull of something unseen, like a storm rising just beyond the horizon. Each step echoed on the marble ground, each sound too loud in the heavy silence. The queen had heard whispers, words spoken too quickly, silence too fast. They carried tales of disfavor, of a decision made in secret chambers. Her family's name, once welcomed in the halls of the palace, was now spoken with sharpness. She wanted to believe it was false, that her husband, the king, would never raise his hand against her blood. But hope, fragile as it was, broke with each passing moment. From a balcony above, servants leaned forward, pretending to polish railings, desperate for a glimpse of what was about to happen. Nobles whispered behind their fans, hiding trembling lips. The courtyard itself felt alive, carrying the tension through its stones. The guards stood like statues, but even statues seemed to breathe in that moment. Queen Camilla stopped at the center. She lifted her chin, her voice breaking the silence. "Where is His Majesty?" she asked, though her voice was more prayer than command. From the shadows of the grand archway, he appeared. King Charles. His figure was sharp against the light. Dressed in his dark tailored suit, metal shining faintly. He walked slowly, each step measured, each sound echoing like a judge's hammer. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his face carried no smile. The queen's heart dropped. She knew this look. She had seen it once before, long ago, when another noble family was cast out forever. She remembered the tears, the silence, the way the guards closed the gates behind them. Now she feared that same fate had come to her. Own blood, Charles. Her voice softened, breaking the distance. She wanted to run to him, to plead, to remind him of the years they had shared, but her feet felt heavy. Her gown, once a symbol of grace, now clung to her like chains. He stopped only a few paces away. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw not cruelty, but something worse, finality. This palace must remain pure. His voice carried, deep and steady, though it cracked faintly at the edges. Your family has crossed too many lines. From this day forward, they shall not return. Their names will no longer be spoken in these halls. The words struck her like a sword. She staggered, her hand flying to her chest. Gasps rose from the balconies. Even the guards, trained to stand motionless, shifted faintly at the weight of the decree. Banished, she whispered, the word falling from her lips as though it burned. Her knees bent, unable to hold her. The courtyard floor met her palms. The stone roughed beneath her trembling hands. Tears filled her eyes, breaking through the strength she had fought to hold. "Charles, no." Her cry echoed, raw and sharp. "They are my blood, my heart. You cannot do this." But the king stood unmoving. His face was stern, but his hands shook faintly behind his back. The guards looked on, their spears catching the light. They could not speak, could not move, yet the sorrow in their eyes betrayed them. The queen's cry tore through the air. She fell fully to the ground, her gown spreading like spilled gold across the stone. The crown upon her head tilted, nearly falling. Her voice broke into sobs, each one heavier than the last dot above. The nobles whispered louder, their words rising like fire in dry grass. Some pitied her, some judged. But none could look away. The unexpected war was not of swords or soldiers. It was of hearts, of loyalty, of love turned cold. And though no blood spilled that day, the wound cut deeper than any blade. The night had fallen heavy over the palace. The golden glow of the courtyard was replaced by torches flickering against the walls, their flames dancing in the cold wind. Yet even the light could not chase away the darkness that had settled inside Queen Camilla's heart. She sat alone in her chamber, the sound of her own sobs still echoing in her mind. Her hands trembled as she held a silk handkerchief, now soaked with tears. The memory of the king's words rang again and again, refusing to fade. "Your family shall not return." Each syllable carved itself deeper into her soul. Her ladies-in-waiting stood at a distance, unsure if they should comfort her. No one dared to speak, no one dared to move too close. The queen's grief was too raw, too heavy. She looked less like the royal figure draped in jewels, and more like a mother who had just lost everything. She rose to her feet, staggering slightly as the weight of her gown pulled against her. Walking toward the tall window, she pushed the heavy curtains aside. From there she could see the courtyard, the same place where she had collapsed hours before. The stone still carried the image of her shame, her crown slipping, her voice breaking. Behind her, a soft voice whispered, "Your Majesty." It was one of her closest attendants, a young maid who had served her for years. The queen turned, her face slowly, her eyes swollen, her cheeks wet. "Tell me it is not true," Camilla whispered, her voice breaking into a plea. "Tell me this is a cruel dream." But the girl could not answer. She lowered her gaze, lips trembling, and stepped back. Silence was her only reply. Camilla pressed her hand against the cold glass of the window. Beyond the walls of the palace lay her family, her sisters, her cousins, her nephews. They were not perfect. They had their flaws, as all families do, but they were hers. And now, they had been torn away from her as though they were strangers. Next morning, the palace halls buzzed with whispers. Nobles moved quietly, yet their eyes told everything. Some looked at the queen with pity, others with judgment. To them, her fall was both tragedy and entertainment. Camilla walked through the halls with her head lowered, her steps slow. Her once strong presence, the aura of a queen who carried herself with dignity, seemed broken. Every glance felt like a dagger, every whisper like a knife twisted deeper. In the council chamber, King Charles sat at the long wooden table. His advisors surrounded him, their robes heavy, their faces serious. The king's decision was being written into the royal decree. A scribe's quill scratched across parchment, sealing the fate of her family forever. The queen entered quietly, her gown brushing the stone floor. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the world stilled. The guards at the doors shifted uncomfortably, knowing they were witnessing something fragile. "Charles," she said softly, but the tremor in her voice carried across the hall. "You are my husband. You are my king. Why would you do this to me?" The king's eyes flickered. His jaw tightened. "This is not against you, Camilla. It is against them. They have crossed boundaries that cannot be ignored." Her heart pounded. "They are my family," she cried, her voice rising, breaking the silence of the chamber. "They are flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood. By casting them out, you tear away pieces of me." The council members lowered their eyes. None dared to interrupt. The king stood slowly. His tall frame cast a long shadow across the room. "I swore to protect this throne, this crown, and this kingdom. Your family has meddled too deeply in matters that are not theirs. It is my duty to end it before it destroys us all." The queen shook her head, her hands clutching the fabric of her gown. "You call it duty," she whispered, tears forming again. "But to me, it is betrayal." Her voice cracked and her knees bent. She fell to the floor, not from weakness of body, but from the crushing weight inside her chest. Her cries echoed through the chamber, reaching even the stone walls that had witnessed centuries of royal sorrows. For a moment, the king's face softened. His eyes betrayed a flicker of pain, but he did not move toward her. His advisors watched in silence, their quills and scrolls frozen in their hands. The queen's sobs filled the chamber, spilling into the corridors beyond. Servants stopped in, their tracks listening. Guards shifted uneasily, their hands tightening on their spears. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath. That night, the queen lay awake in her bed, her crown resting untouched on the table beside her. Sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her family's faces. She heard their laughter, their voices, their love. And then she saw the gates closing on them forever. She clutched the sheets, whispering into the darkness, "I will not let this be the end." And in that quiet vow, beneath the shadows of the palace walls, the real war began, not of kingdoms and crowns, but of hearts and loyalty, of love and betrayal. The morning bells rang through the palace, their deep sound carrying over towers and courtyards. The air was heavy with expectation, for the king had called a public council. Such gatherings did not happen without reason. Guards marched into position, servants rushed to prepare, and nobles dressed in their finest garments, eager to witness what would unfold. In her private chamber, Queen Camilla sat before her mirror. The reflection staring back at her was pale, her eyes swollen from nights without sleep. Her ladies helped her into her gown of gold and sapphire, the fabric heavy upon her shoulders. They placed the crown upon her head, yet she felt no pride in it. Instead, it felt like iron, pressing her down, reminding her of her helplessness. "Your Majesty," one of the women whispered softly, "you must stay strong today." Camilla gave no reply. She only rose to her feet, her body trembling with the weight of what was to come. The great hall filled quickly. Long banners draped from the ceilings, sunlight spilling through tall stained glass windows. Rows of nobles lined the sides, whispering to one another behind their jeweled fans. Their faces carried hunger for spectacle more than sorrow. At the far end, upon the raised dais, the king's throne waited. The sound of boots echoed as the royal guards entered, their steps sharp, their spears glinting. They formed a line, standing as silent witnesses to history. Then the king appeared. Dressed in a dark suit adorned with royal medals, King Charles walked with slow, deliberate steps. His face carried no emotion, though his eyes were heavy with shadows. He climbed the dais and took his seat, the crown gleaming faintly in the light. The herald stepped forward, unrolling a long scroll. His voice rang across the hall, clear and firm. "By the command of His Majesty the King, a decree shall be read before the court." The whispers grew louder, but fell into silence as the herald continued. At the edge of the hall, Camilla's family was brought forward. Her sister, her cousins, and her nephew's faces familiar, now filled with fear. Their fine clothes looked dull under the judging eyes of the court. They stood together, clinging to one another as though the walls themselves might crush them. The queen entered then. Gasps spread through the hall as she walked, every step trembling yet filled with dignity. She moved slowly toward her place beside the king, but her eyes never left her family. Her heart pounded, her throat ached with the urge to scream. The herald's voice cut through the silence. "It is declared that the family of Queen Camilla is hereby exiled from this palace, from these halls, and from all matters of the crown. Their names are removed from all councils, their voices silenced in matters of state, and their presence forbidden upon royal ground. From this day forward, they are strangers to the throne." The words struck like thunder. Gasps and murmurs filled the hall. Some nobles covered their mouths. Others smiled faintly, for palace politics thrived on downfall. Camilla's knees weakened. She gripped the arm of her chair, her face pale. Her sister broke into sobs, her nephews lowered their heads in shame. The family she had loved, defended, and brought into these halls was now banished before her very eyes. One of her cousins cried out desperately, "Your Majesty, we beg you, we are loyal, silence!" The herald's voice boomed, and the guards stepped forward, their spears clashing on the ground. The cousin's words died in his throat, his tears falling in silence. Camilla turned, her face toward the king, her lips trembling. "Charles, please," her voice cracked with desperation. "This is cruelty. This is not justice." But the king did not look at her. His gaze was fixed upon the hall, upon the nobles, upon the throne itself. To him, this was duty, not love. The family was ordered to kneel before the court, their heads bent low, their voices lost in sobs. The guards stood ready to escort them out forever. The queen could take no more. She rose suddenly, her crown slipping as she stepped down from the dais. The nobles gasped as she hurried toward her family, her gown trailing behind her like broken wings. She fell to her knees among them, her arms wrapping around her sister. "My blood," she whispered, her tears falling freely. "You will not face this alone." The hall erupted into chaos. Some nobles stood in shock. Others whispered that the queen had shamed herself further. But none could deny the sight of a royal queen kneeling on the cold stone floor, her sobs rising against the decree of a king. The king's face tightened. He rose from his throne, his voice booming. "Enough!" The sound silenced the hall. Guards froze in place. Even the queen trembled at the power in his tone. "This matter is decided," he declared. "The decree will not be undone." The queen lifted her tear-streaked face, her voice breaking. "Then you exile not only them, you exile me." The hall fell silent. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. For the first time, the king's eyes met hers. A flicker of pain crossed his face, but he did not speak. The guards stepped forward, preparing to escort her family away. And as they rose, the queen clung to them, her sobs echoing like a song of sorrow that would haunt the palace forever. The heavy wooden doors of the great hall closed with a deep echo, sealing away the sound of whispers, gasps, and judgment. The nobles drifted off into their corners, hungry to spread the tale across the kingdom. The guards escorted Camilla's family away, their cries fading into the cold air of the palace corridors. But Queen Camilla did not move. She stood frozen. In the hall, her gown dragging like chains across the marble. Her chest rose and fell with each breath, sharp and uneven, as though the weight of the world pressed against her. Finally she turned. Her eyes, swollen with tears, locked on King Charles. He remained on his throne, his shoulders squared, his face carved in stone. Yet his eyes betrayed something else, something he worked desperately to hide. Camilla took slow steps toward him. Each one echoed, sharp against the silence. The guards shifted uneasily, but dared not move. When she reached the dais, her voice broke into the stillness. "How could you?" The words struck harder than any weapon. The king's jaw tightened. "Do not raise your voice in this hall." She shook her head, her tears streaking down her face. "In this hall? Charles, this hall is filled with nothing but betrayal. You have cut me open before the court, stripped me of the very blood that raised me. You have made me a stranger in my own home." The king rose. His tall figure loomed over her, casting a long shadow across the steps. "I did what I must," he said, his tone deep and steady. "The throne demands loyalty above all else. Your family played with matters of state they had no right to touch." Camilla's voice trembled, but her words burned with fire. "They are not traitors. They are human. They made mistakes, yes, but they are my family. You did not banish liars or thieves today, you banished my heart." The king's eyes flickered. For the first time, his voice cracked. "If I allowed them to stay, they would destroy everything. You know this." Her sobs rose, breaking the strength she tried to hold. She reached for him, her hand trembling. "And what of me, Charles? What of your wife? Did you not see me collapse in front of your guards? Did you not hear me beg before the court? Does that mean nothing?" His breath caught. For a moment, he seemed less like a king and more like a man cornered by his own choices. His eyes softened, but only for a fleeting second. Then he pulled away, his voice hardening once more. "I cannot be swayed by tears." Camilla's hand fell back to her side, her fingers curling into her gown. "No," she whispered bitterly, "you cannot be swayed by love either." Silence filled the hall, thick and suffocating. The guards looked down, their faces shadowed by guilt. Servants along the edges of the room pretended to bow, but their ears caught every word. The queen turned suddenly, her gown swirling as she moved toward the doors. The great hall seemed endless, her footsteps loud in the emptiness. Behind her, the king's voice called out, not with authority, but with desperation. "Camilla." She stopped, but she did not turn. His words struggled to escape. Do not make me choose between you and the throne." Her heart twisted. She wanted to run back, to hold him, to believe the man she once loved still lived beneath the crown. But the wound was too deep, the betrayal too sharp. Slowly she shook her head. "You already made your choice," she whispered. Then she walked out, the doors closing with a thunderous finality that echoed through the palace walls. That night, the queen's chambers were filled with silence. No music played, no laughter filled the halls. She sat by the window, the moonlight casting pale silver across her face. Her crown lay forgotten on the table, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. Below, in the gardens, the guards led her family toward the gates. She pressed her face to the glass, tears streaming freely as she watched them disappear into the shadows. The gates closed with a heavy clang, sealing their fate forever. The queen's cry broke into the night, a sound of grief so raw that even the guards below shivered. She whispered into the emptiness, "Without them, what am I?" And in the dark, while the king sat alone in his study, staring at the decree he had signed with shaking hands, both knew the truth. This war was no longer between family and throne. It was between love and power. And the palace would never be the same. The sun rose pale and weak the next morning, its light falling cold across the palace walls. The courtyard that once rang with the sound of trumpets and laughter now stood silent, waiting. But silence in a palace was never empty. It was heavy, filled with secrets, whispers, and fear. Word spread quickly. King Charles had summoned Queen Camilla's family to hear their fate spoken aloud. It would no longer be just a decree read in court. Today, the king himself would stand before them, his voice sealing the words forever. The queen's heart raced when she heard the news. She begged her ladies for strength as they dressed her, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. She wore white that morning, a gown that shimmered like fragile glass, a symbol of innocence and purity. Yet her soul felt anything but pure. It felt broken. In the lower halls, her family was gathered. Her sister clutched her children close, whispering prayers they did not understand. Her nephews stood tall, trying to be brave, though their eyes shone with fear. Every face was pale, every heart heavy. They knew mercy was slipping further and further from their reach. When the guards came for them, the echo of boots filled the hall. Spears glinted in the light as the family was led toward the courtyard. Servants hid behind doorways, peeking through cracks, their faces pale as they watched the condemned pass. The courtyard was filled with onlookers. Nobles gathered along the balconies, eager for spectacle, their jewels flashing in the morning sun. Royal banners fluttered, but their bright colors could not soften the cruelty of the day. At the center stood the king, tall and stern, his crown catching the light. His face was unreadable, his eyes fixed ahead. Beside him, the queen stood, with her hands clenched tightly together, her knuckles white. Her body trembled, but she forced herself to stand. The guards brought her family forward, forcing them to their knees before the king. The sound of sobbing carried across the courtyard as her sister fell to the ground, clutching at Camilla's skirts. "Mercy," she begged. her voice breaking. "Your Majesty, mercy for us. We are her family. We are no threat to you." Camilla fell to her knees beside her, wrapping her arms around her sister. Her crown tilted dangerously, slipping as her. Tears spilled across her cheeks. "Charles, please," she cried. "I beg you as your wife, as the woman who has stood beside you for years, do not do this." The king's face remained cold, though his eyes flickered with something hesitation. Perhaps pain, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He lifted his hand, and the herald stepped forward to read the words once more. "By royal decree, the family of Queen Camilla is exiled from this palace and this kingdom's councils forever. They are forbidden to set foot upon royal ground. Their voices are stripped of influence, their names erased from the throne's records. They leave today, and they do not return." The words fell like stones into water, rippling through the crowd. Murmurs rose, a mix of shock, pity, and judgment. Camilla's sobs filled the air. She clung to her sister, her tears soaking into the fabric of her gown. No, this cannot be the end. They are innocent." One of her nephews raised his head, his voice desperate. "We have done nothing. Please, Your Majesty, do not cast us out like criminals." The guards struck the ground with their spears, silencing him. The boy lowered his head, tears falling. Silently, Camilla rose to her feet, turning to face the king directly. Her gown flowed around her like a storm, her crown now barely hanging on. "Charles," she said, her voice loud enough for all to hear, "you are not just a king, you are a man. Do you feel nothing watching me break before you? Do you feel nothing hearing their cries?" The king's face tightened. He looked at her, truly looked, and for a moment the hall of power and politics faded away. He saw his wife, broken, desperate, clinging to what little she had left. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened with conflict, but then he turned his face away. "The decision is final," he said, his tone sharp as steel. Gasps rose from the balconies. Nobles whispered furiously, some with shock, others with cold satisfaction. The queen staggered back as if struck. Her breath caught, and she fell once more to her knees, her cries echoing across the courtyard. Her sister was lifted by the guards. Her family, one by one, was pulled away. Their cries filled the air as they were dragged toward the gates. Camilla reached out, her fingers stretching desperately, but her hands grasped only air. "Do not take them," she screamed, her voice breaking. "They are my heart." But the gates opened wide, and the family was forced through. The iron bars slammed shut behind them, the sound reverberating like a final drumbeat. The queen collapsed fully onto the stones, her gown spreading around her like spilled light. Her sobs tore through the silence, so raw that even the guards lowered their heads. The king remained still. His hands, hidden behind his back, trembled faintly. Yet he gave no order to stop, and so the family was gone, cast out into the world beyond the palace walls. While the queen lay broken before her people, her cries becoming the sound of a heart shattered in plain sight. The courtyard lay heavy in silence after the gates closed. The iron clang still echoed in every heart, ringing louder than any bell. Queen Camilla remained collapsed on the stones, her golden gown spread like a broken sun, her crown now tilted helplessly on her head. Her cries filled the open air, piercing the silence until even the birds above refused to sing. The royal guards stood stiff in their lines, spears upright, faces carved into stone. Yet beneath their discipline, their eyes betrayed what their training demanded they hide. Some clenched their jaws, some shifted their feet. They had seen wars, trials, and executions, but never the sight of their queen broken in the dirt, abandoned by the very man meant to protect her. Camilla pressed her palms against the cold stones, her tears soaking into the ground. She lifted her face toward the sky, her voice cracking. "Why must my family suffer? Why must I suffer?" Her words carried across the courtyard, reaching the balconies filled with nobles. Some looked away ashamed. Others leaned forward, hungry to watch every second of her fall. Whispers spread like fire, each word feeding the storm that would soon ripple across the kingdom. At the far end, King Charles turned away from her. His cloak swept behind him as he walked toward the archway leading back into the palace. His steps were heavy, but he forced them steady, as though the weight of his crown demanded he show no weakness. "Your Majesty," one of the counselors whispered, hurrying to his side. "Perhaps we should." "No," Charles cut him off, his voice deep, carrying finality. "The matter is done." But his hands trembled faintly as he pushed open the great doors. Behind him, the Queen struggled to rise. Her arms shook, her knees scraped against the stone. A guard, tall and broad, shifted as though to help her, but he stopped, his orders chaining him in place. Still, his eyes glistened as he watched her collapse again, her strength giving way. A young guard at the end of the line bit his lip, his spear trembling slightly. His commander barked a quiet word, and he straightened again, his face frozen back into emptiness. Yet the Queen had seen him. She had seen the flicker of pity, the spark of humanity among the rigid masks. The Queen gathered what little strength she had and forced herself upright. Her gown was torn at the hem, her hair clung to her wet cheeks, but still she stood. Her body trembled, but her spirit, though broken, refused to vanish. She lifted her chin, her voice ringing out, "Let all who stand here remember this day," she said, her voice rough but clear. A day when a queen's family was cast out like beggars. A day when love was silenced and loyalty was punished. Gasps rose among the nobles. Some clutched their pearls, others murmured nervously. To hear a queen defy her king so openly was unheard of. The guards did not move. Their orders were to remain still, to protect the crown. Yet in their hearts, many silently swore they would never forget her words. The Queen's legs gave way again, and she fell to her knees, but this time she did not weep. Her eyes burned with sorrow and defiance, a flame that no decree could snuff out. Above, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Clouds began to gather, dark and heavy, as though the sky itself mourned with her. A cold wind swept across the courtyard, carrying with it the last echo of her family's cries. Servants rushed forward carefully, daring to help her. They lifted her gently, their hands trembling with fear of punishment, but their loyalty to her stronger than their fear of the king. She leaned against them, her steps slow, her gown dragging. As she passed the line of guards, one dropped his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. She paused, resting her hand briefly against his arm. It was a silent gesture, a thank you for a sympathy he could not show. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening, but he did not move. The Queen was led back toward the palace. The nobles whispered louder now, their voices buzzing like angry bees. Some spoke of rebellion, others of pity, and still others of scandal. The story of this day would spread beyond the palace walls before nightfall. Inside her chamber, the Queen collapsed into a chair. Her attendants tried to comfort her, but she waved them away. She sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the fire in the hearth. The flames danced and crackled, but offered no warmth. At last she whispered to herself, her voice faint but steady. "They think they have silenced me, but grief can speak louder than any crown." And with those words she began to plan not for vengeance, but for memory. If the king's decree could erase her family from the palace, then her sorrow would carve their names into the hearts of all who heard the story. Outside, the guards still stood in the courtyard, their faces blank. Yet deep inside they carried the image of their queen on her knees, her tears staining the stones. It was an image they would never forget. And though the king's decree was final, the echo of her cries had planted something dangerous: sympathy, doubt, and a question none dared to ask aloud. Had justice truly been served? The palace was quieter than ever before. Days had passed since the exile, but the weight of that morning still hung in every corner. Servants whispered carefully, guards walked with heavier steps, and even the nobles lowered their voices when, speaking of the Queen Camilla herself had not been seen outside her chambers for 2 nights. The once bright woman who filled halls with laughter had faded into silence. Yet when the council called another assembly, she was forced to appear, for absence would only feed more rumors. The great hall filled again with nobles in rich silks, their jeweled fans fluttering as they exchanged gossip. They spoke of her family's disgrace, of her collapse in the courtyard, and of the king's unyielding decree, but none dared to speak loudly. Fear of the crown still ruled their tongues. When the doors opened, gasps spread through the crowd. The queen entered slowly, her gown of crimson and gold trailing behind her. Her steps were unsteady, her face pale, but she carried herself with dignity. She wore her crown, though it seemed heavier than ever, pressing down on her as if it wanted her to fall. The king was already seated at the dais. His eyes met hers only briefly before shifting away. His hands rested on the arms of his throne, tight and rigid, as if holding on to power itself. Camilla moved to her place beside him, but as she sat, the weight of the hall, the stares of the nobles, and the whispers that clung to her like smoke became too much. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred. The herald began to read reports of the kingdom, but his words faded in her ears. All she could hear was the echo of the gates slamming shut, her family's cries ringing in her mind. The image replayed again and again until her body could bear no more. Her hand trembled as it gripped the arm of her chair. Then, before anyone could stop it, she slid forward, her crown tilting. She collapsed onto the floor of the dais, her body folding under the weight of grief. A wave of gasps swept through the hall. Nobles rose from their seats in shock, their whispers now frantic. Servants rushed forward but froze under the sharp gaze of the guards. The queen lay on the cold stone, her gown spread around her like a crimson pool. Her crown slipped from her head, rolling across the floor until it struck the bottom step of the throne. The sound echoed like thunder, filling every heart with dread. The guards stood motionless, but their eyes betrayed them again, some clenched, their spears tighter, some swallowed hard, and one guard shifted a step forward before stopping himself. King Charles's eyes widened as he watched her fall. For a moment, his mask of authority cracked. His chest rose sharply, his breath caught. He wanted to move, to rush to her side, to lift her into his arms. But the weight of his crown held him in place. The hall fell silent except for the queen's sobs. She pressed her palms against the stone, her tears falling freely. "Why, Charles?" she cried, her voice breaking, raw and desperate. "Why? Do you turn your face from me? Do you not see me? Do you not hear me?" Her words carried like arrows, piercing even the hardest hearts in the room. Servants lowered their heads in sorrow, nobles exchanged guilty glances, and even the counselors shifted uncomfortably. The king's hands trembled where they gripped the throne. He rose slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the hall. He stepped forward 1 pace, then stopped. His lips parted, but no words came. The weight of the crown, the eyes of the court, the burden of the kingdom chained his tongue. Queen lifted her face, streaked with tears, her voice hoarse. "If love means nothing to you, then what is this crown worth?" Her crown lay at the foot of the throne, gleaming faintly in the torchlight. The sight of it separated from her head felt like a symbol that the bond between king and queen was as fragile as the thin band of gold. The hall remained frozen. No one dared to move, no one dared to speak. The only sound was the queen's sobs echoing against the stone walls. Finally, the king turned his face away. His voice, when it came, was steady but hollow. "The throne demands strength, not weakness." "The favor." Queen's body shook with her cries, but she forced herself up onto her knees. Her voice cracked, yet it carried across the hall with a strength born from pain. "Then you will sit on that throne alone. For you have exiled more than my family, you have exiled your own heart." Gasps filled the chamber again. Nobles covered their mouths, servants clutched each other, and even the guards exchanged troubled glances. The king froze, his face tight with pain, but he did not answer. His silence was louder than words. At last, the queen rose shakily to her feet. Without her crown, she looked less like a monarch and more like a grieving woman. Yet in her brokenness, she carried a strange kind of power, one that no throne could command. She turned from the king and walked slowly down the hall, her gown dragging across the stone. Every eye followed her. No one stopped her. No one dared. And as the great doors closed behind her, the nobles whispered what none had dared to say before, that the palace had lost its queen long before it lost her family. The palace never returned to its former self. Though days turned into weeks, the echoes of that morning, her collapse, her cries, her crown striking the stone lingered in every corner. Servants spoke more softly, nobles walked more carefully, and even the guards carried their spears with heavier arms. The shadow of sorrow had settled, and it would not leave. Queen Camilla withdrew into her chambers. Curtains stayed closed, music no longer filled the halls, and her laughter, the sound that once warmed even the coldest marble, was gone. She rose only when duty demanded it, and even then, her steps were slow, her face pale. Her crown, polished and gleaming, often sat untouched upon the table, yet whispers carried beyond the walls of the palace. The people of the kingdom heard of the queen's grief. Farmers in the fields, merchants in the market, children in the streets all repeated the story of the woman who had begged for her family and was left to fall before the throne. Some spoke of it as tragedy, others as injustice. All agreed it was unforgettable. In the council chamber, King Charles sat with his advisors, but his thoughts strayed elsewhere. Though his face remained stern, his heart was restless. He replayed the sight of her crown rolling across the floor, her hands trembling, her cries breaking the silence of the court. Each night, when he closed his eyes, her voice haunted him. "You exile not only them, you exile me." Still, he told himself, the throne demanded sacrifice. He had chosen duty over love. And yet, every choice weighed heavier than the crown upon his head. One evening, unable to rest, he walked through the courtyard where it had all happened. The stones were silent, but he felt the weight of her tears soaked into them. He looked to the gates, the same gates that had closed on her family, and for the first time in many years, he bowed his head. The guards watched in silence, but none dared to speak. Meanwhile, the queen sat by her window, her hands folded on her lap. She gazed out toward the horizon, where her family had gone, and whispered their names like a prayer. She spoke not with anger but with sorrow, her words soft yet steady. She knew the exile could not be undone, but she also knew that memory was more powerful than decrees. Her attendants listened quietly, carrying her words in their hearts. Servants spread them through corridors, and guards carried them beyond the palace walls. Soon, her grief became not just her own, but a story told in every corner of the land. She fell in the courtyard. They whispered. She begged before the throne. She was broken, but her love was stronger than any crown. The story traveled further than any order could reach. Beyond the capital, into distant towns, across seas with merchants, it grew, retold and reshaped, but always carrying the same truth, that a queen's sorrow had revealed more power than a king's decree. Within the palace, even the nobles began to change. Some who once mocked her wept quietly when her name was spoken. Guards who had stood stiff that day carried guilt in their eyes. And the servants who had witnessed her collapse told their children and grandchildren of the moment. They saw a queen break and rise again, even without her crown. Camilla herself grew quieter but stronger in spirit. She no longer pleaded with Charles. She no longer begged him to change his command. Instead, she lived with dignity, her silence louder than words. When she walked the halls, people bowed lower, not out of fear but out of respect. For though the king still wore the crown, it was the queen's grief that ruled their hearts. In the end, the exile remained. Her family never returned. The gates never opened for them again. But their memory lived in her sorrow, carried in whispers, in stories, in the silence of the guards who could never forget her cries. And so, her fall in the courtyard became legend. Children repeated it as a tale of love and loss. Poets wrote verses of her tears. The palace stones, they said, still remembered the touch of her hands and the echo of her sobs. Even King Charles, in the quiet hours of the night, could not escape it. He had chosen the throne, but in doing so, he had lost something greater. And the palace itself seemed to whisper it back to him. Through every corridor and every silent hall, a crown may command a kingdom, but a broken heart commands eternity.